now. This is the whole Flowers of Romance. It's the anniversary almost of us arriving in the US for the first time, April 1980. It's just there's been so many of these anniversaries that kind of warrant a gathering, you
Yeah.
know. So I've been in that. And I'm just trying to. I'm going through my archives, kind of pushed by these events. So instead of just me showing up and go, let me tell you what I remember about whatever,
Yeah.
I found my diary with the first Brian Brain show, and then I found a bag of receipts, and I think there's a receipt from the rehearsal for the first Brian Brain show, and then I found the receipt for the fabric of one of my suits that Sandy Powell made for me, and now of course she is designer to the stars, and um, I'm like PM. There's this receipt from a shop on the Portobello Road, and it's like PM. Like, why would they put the time on this fabric receipt? It's because it's per meter,
Oh,
£4 per meter,
yes.
and it's kind of interesting, but at the same time, just this tiny bit frightening that I kept all of this stuff, what collaged together with the story. It becomes really magical for me. Like, so I'm telling a story, and here are these entry in a diary and a receipt and an invoice from Better Badges, also on the Portobello Road,
Yes.
for
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
Brian Brain buttons and um, just crazy. So I've been in this kind of looking forwards, because I think we're starting to establish a museum. So looking forwards into that, but of course that activity in and of itself is a looking backwards activity. So
Yeah.
yeah, so
Great.
it's been a really interesting time spending more time with my kids, which has kind of been a blessing.
Yeah.
Um, and getting to grips with the online thing, and thinking and writing and doing that stuff.
You know. So,
Right, right.
you know.
And I just started. I stopped drinking about 2 months ago. I've had my spells of drinking
You
and not
stopped drinking when your dad died, didn't you? If I remember you telling me. No, I mean
no,
you started drinking again. That's what I mean. You started
yeah,
drinking
I,
again when your
I
dad. Yeah.
I had 16 years sober when my
Right.
dad died, and I was just like, "Oh, screw this."
Yeah.
And you know, I'm getting older. I'm
Yeah.
61 now, and I was just like, I can't. It's one thing when I'm getting ready for a tour or I'm drumming, that just keeps me fit. But
Right.
in the absence of that and the presence of COVID, it's like, you know what? Let's stop drinking. Let's get healthy. Let's lose some weight, and
Yeah.
let's keep things rolling.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm always thrilled. I'm always excited to welcome a man that I've known for an awful long time, Mr. Martin Atkins, back to the program. Martin, welcome back to Life Elsewhere.
Hey, Norm, it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Martin. I was thinking about the reason why I'm having you on the program, and that is to celebrate and to commemorate, I guess, the 40th anniversary of the Flowers of Romance LP, which you played on you're recognized on 3 tracks, but I believe you're on 4 tracks.
No, well, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Let's go. Hold on a second. Let's get into that
yeah.
in just a minute. Let's get into that. Um, but it's also an anniversary for another band that's when I first met you, a band by the name of Brian Brain. What's the anniversary for Brian Brain?
The 40th anniversary of the first single.
The first single.
Yeah, they got
Yes.
me in the bottle. So when I these were heady days in 1980 when we were touring with PIL, Boston, New York, Cleveland, San Fran, LA, all that stuff. But that single was in the alternative charts in the UK. So I mean, imagine being a 20-year-old kid, and I'm in California with PIL, and I open up a week-old edition of Melody Maker, and my Brian
Yeah.
Brain single is 23 in the alternative charts. And it was like, you know, here we go, and it's been a little bit crazy ever since.
I remember having you as a guest, and you
Hmm.
were wearing one of those plaid suits. You came into a radio station that I was working at then called Crab in Seattle, and you came in, and we had a whale of a time. And I remember playing an American band on the air, and I think they were called Head Cheese, and you made some kind of remark about it. And I should dig out the tape because I've got a tape of that somewhere. And I remember you just making a big thing about head cheese. How could you be called head cheese? It was funny, funny, funny at the time. Really was. Do you remember back those days? I'm sure you. Yeah,
I remember some pieces
some pieces. Yeah.
with frightening clarity, and of course, we were all crazy back then. There are moments, days, nights, and sometimes weeks that are just lost.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've got tapes. I've got recordings where you can hear very clearly somebody doing a. I'm going to make the noise. It's like a. And you know what that was, of course. It was somebody cutting up lines of anyway on the control board. I mean,
Wow.
it was a different time. It was
Yeah.
a different
It
time.
was
So,
it was a very different time. Yeah.
so let's talk about Flowers of Romance, because there's such a lot of I guess not just intrigue but misnomers about this album. For me, it was a breakthrough album. I remember playing it on the radio. I remember going on about it a great deal. And but I also remember a lot of people poo-pooing it, saying this was rubbish. And since then, over the years, there's been a lot of nonsense going on about it. Some of it just complete fabrication, and some of it, realistically, it's on the money. Let's just hear Martin Atkins' take on Flowers of Romance.
Well, so uh, it's interesting. There was an interesting piece in a UK uh, on a UK site called The Quietus,
Yeah.
um, and I thought I was talking to this guy Eric. I think it was Eric. No, maybe it wasn't. Anyway, we talked for a while. Turned out he'd spoken to John at length and to Nick Launay at length, and so his piece was actually, for the first time in 40 years, probably the most balanced, correct piece I'd seen. So at the time, I was credited with co-writing 3 songs: "For Enclosed Walls," "Banging the Door," "Under the House."
Yeah.
Um, Maybe 5 years ago, John and his manager sent me paperwork saying, "Well, I actually played on the title track, "Flowers of Romance." And then there's 2 other songs I want to say, "Go Back," which is a loop of me, and something else. Um, but a few people have been asking the question because I was presented at the time like just a session drummer.
Yes.
Uh, and that was really I would call that the party line, because Joe Wobble, the stunning still bass player of international repute, who you cannot fail but to recognize his signature sound, he quit. And it was just John and Keith. And they asked me to come and work on the album. And so the party line was, "Oh, Martin's just a session drummer." But this journalist a few weeks ago was like, "Well, why do you have co-writes? Because you don't give session people co-writes. You give them a chunk of money, and if you accidentally write a couple of pieces, that's on you because you were paid a session fee." But
Right.
I wasn't paid a session fee, and I got co-writes. So, and I think, and then of course, right in that first 5-10 years after the album, John was asked about it a lot. Keith was asked about it a lot. Keith claimed that he was drumming on some songs.
Yes.
And I'm just like, come on, you know, like on Under the House, I'm sorry it might seem like 2 drummers, but it's me. And I play from the shoulder. And if Keith had been playing some of those beats, his arms would have snapped. It's like, I mean, come on. And so, because there wasn't guitar on some of that stuff, and I also understand, I quit the band in '85 after "This Is Not a Love Song" was a big success, and So John isn't going to carry on doing interviews after that, going, well, let me tell you about Flowers of Romance. Martin Atkins did this, 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 and this. And so I think John took on the role of strategist. People assumed because he was the singer, he had this vision, and he wasn't in the studio for much of it, as this article finally kind of points out that for Banging the Door, Nick Launay describes John would just come in at the end of the day to hear what Nick and I had done. And John spilled out all the cigarettes from his packet of cigarettes so he could open up the packet and use the inside of the packet to write the lyrics, which he then sang first take onto these insane collages that Nick and I were putting together. So it was really interesting for me, finally, after 40 years, to see a fairly considered, no spin version of what happened. A few years ago on Pitchfork, a really nice journalist, actually, and talented artist, Vivian Goldman, she did what was called the definitive inside look at Flowers of Romance. And she's talking about 2 weeks on a farm where nothing happened. It's like, well, okay, so it feels different to see a more considered story out there that also isn't me saying, no, I did
Yeah,
this.
yeah,
I played tambourine on that song. I played tambourine on A Hard Day's Night, which is kind of pathetic.
yeah,
So it
yeah,
was
yeah.
it was really great that somebody else wrote that article. Yeah.
Yes. One of the things about it is that over this period of time, and thank you for explaining that to us, Martin, is that there has been such a lot of sort of ifs and buts and stories told, and people have, I guess, made up things in some respects. And these things happen, I guess, in the rock and roll business. But this one was a peculiar one because John has a trail of sort of peculiar stories that have always surrounded him, and you were amongst that at the time. And the thing that I'm going to say now is that it's always struck me, and from the first time I ever met you, was that I always got the feeling that you were just a very straightforward fella. There was no mucking around. You weren't putting on an act. You were Martin, and I will still stick with that. And it sounds to me like you haven't changed. I mean, you're still Martin. You still talk. You still say it like it is, and so it's really nice to get your take on this.
Well, I think that's um, it feels like a northern trait from England. Like, hold on a minute, there's no, the emperor doesn't have any clothes on. I,
Right. Yeah.
I think Wobble and I both brought to Pill this kind of working class value for money, roll up your sleeves aesthetic, where we didn't like to leave the audience shortchanged with a 30-minute show, and that was in direct opposition to, I think, what Keith Levine thought was wanted to be anti rock and roll. And strangely, it seemed like if we'd done more, we could have disrupted things more if we'd spread that anti rock and roll message more by touring more and being more rock and roll and having t-shirts that with our messages on the shirts
Yeah.
instead of staying home and doing drugs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Looking back on it now, 40 years on, um, Flowers of Romance, the actual track itself, the drumming on that track is so incredibly powerful. It's so you. Talk to me about just the drumming on that album and on that particular track.
Well, so there's a combination of really interesting things on all of that stuff. um, I would detune my tom toms so that the drum heads were almost just sitting on top of the shells.
Ah,
And in fact, one of the things my techs would do is kind of go around the stage after a show, getting the whatever you call those
Yeah, 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 yeah,
two, the little screws,
yeah.
because they would just vibrate free. And but that sound only works if one, as I said, you play from the shoulder, you really beat the things, and you put those drums in a place like Studio 2 at the Townhouse in London, which is all stone, high ceiling drum room. It feels like it should have a fireplace in it, it's just this tall stone drum room. And then underneath the room, underneath the suspended wood floor, is a stone basement, which is completely empty. So everything reverberates. And so it changes the way you want to play your drums. You want the drums to speak and not cut off the reverb of them. And uh, it just fueled so much. There was a few albums that came out of that room, of course, most notably Phil Collins, In the Air
Well,
Tonight.
yes. I was
Yeah,
just about to say that there's the
yeah,
story about Phil Collins hearing Flowers of Romance, you're drumming on that, and was so impressed by it, he wanted to record there. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. And but that's me playing the drums, but that is also, I think, the third part of that album, which is Nick Launay. He was 4 or 5 weeks into his career. He was a tape op, and
yes.
really, what tape op? It's a magazine now, right? It's a um, for engineers to talk about all of their uh, crazy equipment fetish, But tape ops back then were basically T-boys. There might have been some girls, but it was mainly a young man's game.
Yeah,
And they would bring the tea,
yeah,
not coffee so much, but they bring the tea. And so, and there weren't so many remote controls to press play, stop, record on the tape machine. So the tape operator would sit on a stool next to the machine, and the engineer would say, "Recording, got record tracks 2," and the tape op would do that.
yes,
You know,
yeah,
and
yeah,
uh, um, and so nobody in that studio wanted to work with John, and so it was Nick, and um, fortunately, he had the technical knowledge. And I think both he and I had this, I can only describe it as glee, to be like, what does this do? Oh, I don't know. Let's find, let's turn all the knobs. And we just played in this room and made these collages. And I've said this before, because I think when I say John was not the strategist or architect of this, like none of us were individually. But when a journalist would ask John about his plans for the album and what he thought going in, we're all losing sight of the fact that what John did was this pure genius thing that I don't know that I've seen it. Maybe a little bit Chris Connolly, where John would sit sometimes outside the studio, sometimes in a place where you couldn't see him, like in front of the console on a couch. But he'd be there listening, and we create these crazy collages. And then he would go and sing a pop song over the top. Now,
yes,
if somebody had done some bizarre jazz cut up spoken word piece, it would have been bizarre plus bizarre equals unlistenable
yeah,
niche.
yeah,
But for John to sing pop over the top of this, and I think much in the same way that I think Maynard sings over Tool, you know, he sings some pop that pulls you in to
yes,
these, you know, I think it's, I think by painting his as a traditional singer songwriter role, we've ignored this really unique aspect to him and his true talent.
yes. You know, the Flowers of Romance album as a whole, I remember when it came out, the one of the big things that people talked about, that it was not only different to everything else that was going on at the time, but it was different to what John had done previously as PIL. Your thoughts on that?
Well, um, on the one hand, as I mentioned, the party line, right? The
Yeah.
party line might be, we reinvent ourselves with each turn of the wheel, and boom, boom, boom. We're not resting on our laurels, blah, blah, blah. But Metal Box felt different, but the same family
Yeah.
as the first album, recognizable songs with a recognizable lineup. But the fact was with Flowers that Wobble quit,
Yes.
so, and I think um, it never seemed like an option. Nobody ever said who's going to play bass. And I think whether that was a deliberate decision or just some kind of smart, because I think replacing Wobble would have invited probably inferior comparisons, you know. So uh, I think once Nick and I started with these collages, John just went with it, and a kind of a new and different pill came out of that.
Yes. Did Keith Levine play bass on a couple of tracks?
I think he played bass on Home Is Where the Heart Is,
Yeah.
but that might be Wobble. It might be what
Ah.
sounds like Wobble to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that, I mean, if you just a little interesting fact,
Yeah.
the original version of Home Is Where the Heart Is, that pressed, it was on the B side of Flowers of Romance,
Yeah.
was credited to Jim Walker, who played drums on the first album.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was me, it was eventually corrected, but a journalist called Clinton Halen, who is now a very well respected, well, by everyone except me, a very well respected journalist, he went off on this whole thing about how Home Is Where the Heart Is proved that Jim Walker was a better drummer than me. And he
Oh.
used me playing on Home Is Where the Heart Is to
Yeah.
prove that Jim Walker was better than me, not knowing that that was me.
Me. Yeah.
You know,
Wow.
um, yeah, yeah. But what a strange, convoluted mess.
Yes. Yes. Looking back on it now, I mean, these as we started off, these were interesting times. These were. It's hard to imagine how strange things were back then. Although at the time, it really didn't seem strange, did it, Martin?
No, we were just. It's so difficult to describe this time because even things that are dangerous now, you'll have to sign a waiver before you go in the mosh pit. I mean,
Yes.
it was just dangerous. You know, the second tour with Brian Brain, I was bottled in the face, broken nose, broken jaw, hospital in San Francisco, hospital in New Orleans. It was a 21-day tour. Things were more dangerous on the surface. Times Square in New York, we were waiting for pizza, just waiting to get shot in the back of the head.
Yeah.
There was crime scene tape on the hotel room next door, somebody being murdered in the room next door. I mean, it was just like, oh yeah, okay, like now you'd be outraged and demand a discount, and we can't possibly be on the same floor as a dead body.
Right.
It
Yeah.
was just like, yeah, oh, dead body in the next door. Whoa, let's steal some of the crime scene tape.
Yeah.
So um, it was this very different, um, edgy, adrenalized, gleeful time where there were no rules. Um, and uh, we didn't have to refer to that fact before we made something happen. We just made stuff happen.
Yeah. Yeah. The album itself, looking back now from where you are now, back to 40 years ago, not the making of the album, but the finished result of the album, Martin. What's your take on it now?
Um, well, obviously for me, if you were involved in that album and then witnessed the almost total annihilation of that album by the critics,
Yeah.
you know, freshly off of when we released Paris au Printemps, people said they did an encore. Why would you do an encore to a half-empty room of people that hate you? It's like people were going crazy. I'm like,
Yes.
these
Yeah.
journalists are lying. Um, to um, the album has always been really close to my heart because pieces of it came from inside of me.
Yes.
So to see, people like Jeff Tweedy and all kinds of people, there's a chapter in his book about it, coming back around to this album 40 years later seems insane, and vindication isn't the right word because uh, um, it's always been close to me and always been a kind of a strange accomplishment. I sent John a message yesterday. We don't speak anymore, but I sent a message to his manager going, hey, 40 years, I mean, we did that, you know,
Yeah.
um, and a strange kind of connection to that period through that album.
Yeah.
If anything, it seems wilder now than it did then.
Yes. Yes, I totally understand what you mean. Just got to ask you this because you and I have talked about this before about not speaking to John. That you're not, but I know that you do send him birthday cards and whatever.
Yeah.
Um, I think I've said this to you before, but it is rather sad that you don't have this communication, that you can't pick up the phone and just chat to the fella. Um, any thoughts about that at all? Just, I mean, again, we have talked about this before.
Well, and if you caught me 10 years ago, I might be like, well, F him and blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah, 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 you know. But as I sit here now, looking at the 40th anniversary for Brian Brain, the chap who I started that project with, who engineered the first single, went on to work with the Cocteau Twins, Wolfgang Press, etc., etc. He's in care right now with deteriorating dementia, and Paul Raven from Killing Joke is no longer around for me to scream at him.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so somebody asked me, would you do a show? Would you do a tour? I'm like, I don't know if I would do a tour, but I'd be a liar if I said I wouldn't like to walk on stage and pound out Under the House, Flowers of Romance, banging the door, and uh, and and relive that moment and rekindle that connection. I mean, I
yeah,
feel connected. Obviously, I spent 5 years in that band, but I think it's a shame for either of us that we're not still connected.
yeah.
Um, uh, and so um, I'm more careful these days about what I say
Yes,
because um, the thing that I say might catch somebody at a time when they're thinking about reaching out, um, or at a time when interesting things could happen. You know, I have all this insane unheard material from Flowers of Romance.
oh really? Oh,
Yeah, and there's a song called Vampire that was made in exactly the same way that we made the other tracks. Interesting sounds. I drank Perrier, and it was recorded at 15 inches a second, and we played it back at 1 3/4 inches per second, and it's just
wow.
and then I played this crazy circular beat, and then Keith played guitar, probably the poppest guitar that would have been on Flowers, bass, synth, and John sang a fully formed vocal. They released a version of that, which is just drums and the Perrier sound, um,
Huh.
on an album called Songs from the Heart. I have the whole song. I've got alternate takes of a few things. I've got a version of Twist and Shout where they sat me down to play me the 2 weeks of work they'd done, and it was John singing over the Beatles. So I would love that material to come out. Of course, I can't do anything with it, but John doesn't have it. So
Who has it,
everyone,
Martin? Who has
I've,
it?
I've got it.
Oh, you've
You
got it.
know,
But
yeah,
do you have the rights to it? Can you release any of it? No,
no,
no, no.
no, and I think the correct thing to do would be for John and his organization to release it in the way that they would want. But I think it's something that fans would really love, you know. And
Yes.
so, I mean, if I've got a receipt for the fabric from one of my suits, you know, I still have all of these boxes of cassettes.
Yeah.
And so, uh, and I could, you know, I still have John's number. Of course, I could pick up the phone.
Yeah.
Um, I, I, I just feel as though uh, I think I'd want to say to John, I'm going to be calling on Tuesday, you know, go through all of the emotions,
Yeah.
th-
Yeah.
think about what you might want to say to me, and I'll think about what I might want to say to you.
Yeah.
And um, his manager wanted me to interview him for my book, um, but would only allow it on condition that John would have final approval. And I said, well, of course, John can, you know, look at the the chat that we have and make sure I don't misinterpret anything. And it was like, no, John would need to have final approval over the entire book. I'm like, oh, come on, man, that's just not going to happen, you know.
Yeah. I would like to talk to you for longer. As always, I always enjoy talking to you, Martin. Unfortunately, as you know, I say
Yeah,
the normal thing: time is up against us, etc.,
yeah,
etc.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, Martin. Once again, it's just an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for giving us a little bit more insight and specifically talking about some of those tracks that haven't been released. A pleasure, my friend.
It's nice to talk to you, Norman, always.
Always good to talk to you, my friend. You stay well, love to your family, and you just take care of yourself.
Yeah, you too.
All right, my
You
friend.
too. Nice
Lots
to
of
see
love.
you.
See ya. Bye bye now.